All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I am extremely excited to welcome two special guests today to the Polymath Salon podcast, whatever we're calling it. That is Atman Pandya and Jim O'Shaughnessy himself, both representing O'Shaughnessy Ventures. I think you can figure out Jim's relation to that by his last name. And we're going to talk about a lot of different things today. Since we have a pretty diverse background of people on here, we'll be talking about some of the paths people have taken in their own ways to fund and develop projects inside and outside of academia. So that's sort of the traditional and then the less conventional paradigm. We'll get into what Jim and Atman are building with O'Shaughnessy Ventures, the types of projects they're funded, their philosophy on how to approach funding projects like this that are especially experimental or centric. And I'm sure many questions will fill themselves in from there. So Atman, if you want to give a real quick intro about who you are and what you're doing.
Excellent. Thanks, Addy, for inviting us. Happy to be here. Just a brief background. I originally started my career as a software engineer building data warehouses for hedge funds and then Android apps for health tech startups. Did my MBA and then joined JP Morgan working on the strategy team, basically doing everything from CEO business reviews to helping build out their sustainability strategy to helping launch Chase UK. That was up until 2022 when I found Jim on the podcast where he had Infinite Loops, which is already ongoing. I'm like, here is someone who is so successful, made it big on Wall Street, but still posts funny GIFs on Twitter. And I kind of knew him with just purely from Twitter. Joined him there primarily on the podcast, and then once OSV launched, since there I was primarily working across on multiple different roles, but then primarily focusing on building out the O'Shaughnessy Fellowships and Grants program, where the fellowships is basically a 1 year program where we find and fund the world's most bold and undiscovered researchers, builders, and creatives all around the world, basically to find, build, and create and spread new ideas all across the world. We offer funding of up to $100,000 for 1 year.
And then the man himself, Jim O'Shaughnessy.
Well, thank you for having me, and I'm delighted to be here. As Atman mentioned, most of my career was spent on Wall Street.
Quite successfully.
I developed back in the 90s what is now known as factor investing, which is a derivation of pure quantitative investing. It's basically algorithmic security selection. And as common as it is now, when I started it, everyone looked at me very funny and they're like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, that isn't the way you pick stocks at all. But I was always incredibly interested in things outside of Wall Street and science, innovation across any discipline. I'm a huge fiction guy who's never had a chance until now to write a fiction book. I've written 4 books, all nonfiction. 2 of them did very, very well. One of them is really responsible for my career, called What Works on Wall Street. It is now in its 4th edition, and literally it was my attempt to say, hey, do any of these factors work? And if so, where is the empirical proof over long periods of time, as academically minded people intuitively understand? Small sample sizes can lead to very odd and unreplicatable results, but much larger sample sizes tend to be a better guide for most things. And that's in fact what we found and published in the book, What Works on Wall Street. Interestingly enough, you can pretty much read the book and then be a do-it-yourself investor if you want to be, because we spell out all of the algorithmic selection models. We tell you how to build them. We tell you how they've done. We tell you the worst that they've done. The thing I'm very interested in learning via negativia. A lot of people don't look at the things that don't shout at you. And for example, most people are very unaware of how badly an investment strategy they might be using right now might have done over very long periods of time. And I found that to be invaluable information for our clients who would come into our office asking for, of course, the strategy that had done the best recently or over a longer period of time. And then I would show them the 10 worst drawdowns for that particular strategy. A drawdown is from peak to trough. How much did you have to suffer when using that strategy? And the reactions were, I still remember them, like you could tell instantly whether somebody was going to be a right fit for a strategy by the way they reacted to the downsides. Sold the company to Franklin and Templeton in 2021 and launched O'Shaughnessy Ventures because I needed to have a year of garden leave from O'Shaughnessy Asset Management under the terms of our agreement, and launched O'Shaughnessy Ventures in 2023. A big part of what I wanted to do with O'Shaughnessy Ventures is what we are talking about today. I feel that there is so much brilliance and genius in the world that is going unfunded. And I think that, as I'm sure we'll get into, some of the more traditional funding sources, primarily if you're looking for big grants from government, but from a variety of sources, have become more and more narrow. And I felt that that was a huge disservice to innovation, as a lot of ideas are, hey, that's weird. And so we felt that by creating this platform, we could not only help the creator, the researcher, the investigator with their project, but also amplify what is being done. And I think that we've already seen a reaction that I really wasn't anticipating until sort of year 5 of the fellowships and grants program, in that the network is an incredibly interesting one. It is cognitively diverse. We have gatherings and watching people from very different disciplines and domains interact, and then having something incredibly fruitful come out of that interaction is something that we see time and time again. So we've also seen, though, a much greater interest in these types of grants and fellowships for researchers who are not having any luck with the sometimes very narrowly defined things that big grant programs will fund. So having a blast doing it, meeting all sorts of incredible people and thinkers. And that was yet another reason why we wanted to engage in the fellowships and grants program.
Now, I'm fortunate to have been generously funded by getting a grant from you this year for a project that I'm working on, and there's several other people on here. I think Alfuxad is on here, Dan Van Zandt. I think there's a couple others on here that have gotten funding. And, you know, one of the questions I've always had is I'm very interested in the transfer of skills. Matt, you know, when you learn something in one domain and then you can apply that to things into another domain, and sometimes that can be a very, very different domain, and we call that far transfer in, you know, cognitive science and psychology. And so what I'm really curious about in your case, Jim, is the things that you learned from your previous edge of your career. How much of that was very directly applicable to what you're doing with OSV today? And then some of the things that you sort of had to change your perception on?
So a lot was directly applicable to what we're doing today, in that many times traditional, if you look at our website, you'll see that we are very media focused. We have a podcast unit, we have a film unit, we have a publishing company, Infinite Books. And many times I've noticed that creatives can sometimes be very precious about their ideas. And I like to, speaking about transferring skills, I like to verify. And what do I mean by verify? I mean, I'd like to see some empirical data that says, yeah, this is a rich vein that has gone unmined when we get examples of brave researchers going ahead and mining it anyway. there's a lot of signal there that traditional grants programs are not paying much attention to. But the same thing holds true for all of the verticals. I think, for example, right a moment ago, we have a big book coming out from Infinite Books, and there's a debate going on about the cover. And so what we do is we A/B test all of our covers, not only with human audiences, but with AI audiences that we have built. We have our own AI lab here at O'Shaughnessy Ventures because we worry that some of the commercial models will get nerfed and turfed because pure signal and real answers sometimes very much conflict with the narratives of people who are currently in power, and they don't like that at all. And so we wanted to make certain that our AI could be as lobotomized as possible. But what's really interesting is that is a direct application of my work as a quantitative investor. It's like, listen to the market, because you might have a very, very passionate opinion about something, but if the market disagrees with you and it's a commercial enterprise, you probably are going to be the loser in that exchange. I am fascinated by markets because of the way markets are essentially complex adaptive systems with feedback loops, and markets clear. In other words, the price of Apple or Nvidia or whatever you're looking at ends up at whatever it does at the end of the day, meaning somebody sold it at that price, but somebody also bought it at that price. And obviously, they can both have good reasons for doing that. I'm 65 years old. Maybe I owned Nvidia for 10 years. I've done very, very well. You're young, but maybe you're starting a family, or you want to have a college fund for your child. Both are very valid reasons. Mine is, hey, did really great with that. Yours is, hey, I'm planning for the future. Markets generally are incredibly efficient at distilling kind of the net assessment of everyone participating in them, and that's that final price. And that is because, for the most part, we have heterogeneous opinions, right? As I just mentioned, your reason for buying Nvidia from me is very different from my reason for selling it, but it's the heterogeneity that allows markets to clear. Markets also have feedback loops, and one of the things that can trip up markets is when you get what I call information cascades, which are very typical of bubbles and crashes. And what they tend to do is they tend to move market participants' ideas from heterogeneity to homogeneity. Everyone's thinking the same thing at the same time. And I've seen it in action, and it is a sight to behold, because literally it makes markets go into bubbles and crashes. And it isn't until that clears out of the way that you have a return to the more diverse opinion groups. So taking all of the knowledge that I've learned, also studied behavioral economics very deeply. And it's all incredibly applicable to everything we're doing right now. Even fellowships and grant awards, we use quantitative measures, but not only, right? I'm not a huge fan of, we're only going to look at it through data, or I'm only going to look at it through my intuition. I think you have to do both. Many discoveries, many innovations, as I said in the introduction, were accidents, right? Like penicillin. It's just a very happy accident. But there's a plethora of examples where this is true. I grew up in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul. 3M, which used to be called Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing before they changed it to 3M, and you can see where they got it from. Post-it notes, they which is a huge revenue item for 3M, were discovered while they were looking for a glue that was permanent, that you once put on, you could never get anything that you've used that glue to stick it to a wall or whatever off. And they didn't find it, but what they did find was what is the adhesive on the back of all of our Post-it notes. So I use that example because it's always good to keep a very open mind about, hey, I was looking for this, but I found this. This might have applications that I wasn't even thinking about. But oftentimes we get blinders on, and we let that aha moment slip by. So I think that a combination of both the intuitive and the data is where you want to be. It's kind of like we need not just Athens, we need Sparta too. We need both ways of looking at the world.
One of the
And to just give like an example of the data which kind of Jim was talking about, because in a lot of these things, when we fund people, you don't have like the data at the very earlier stage. One person who we had funded on the creative side was a musician from India. This was his first song. He was going to release it. He had never released a song before, but I'd seen him on open mics perform. And one thing that came out was the crowd always used to sing along with him, where he had a uncanny ability to just connect with the crowd. And the second thing that we looked at was one of the things which came out was, even though he had never released songs, he had released 1 minute clips on Spotify. And two of those had actually more than 100,000 hits just on those 1 minute songs. Now, again, he also had quite big dreams. He wanted to be, and he will probably, he's on the track for that, to be like equivalent to Bob Dylan, at least in India. So using those three things, it's like, okay, this seems very interesting, very unique. And we've had information that you would not necessarily find just online, because we had like in person, we'd seen him. So we backed him up. He basically gave him a grant. He released his first song, which surprisingly went ultra viral, climbed up to the top of the charts on the Spotify Global Viral Top 50, got retweeted by Bollywood stars, etc. Got, I think, a cumulative views using reels, etc., where people would use his songs, more than 2.2 billion hits on his first song itself, which is just insane. So again, this would be like an example of using some signals which are there, which are very few at the beginning, but you can then make an assumption using tying in all the different things together, as Jim mentioned.
So in this particular person you're talking about, at one point, is he going to get an Indian Timothy Chalamet to cover him in a biopic?
Let us hope so. He is on his way. He basically got a record deal based off of that, where all the labels wanted to get him, and they offered him a deal where he could still be independent, which they don't offer anyone else, or at least not generally they don't offer.
Well, this is because I feel like people they put a line in the sand between the arts and the sciences, and we spoke a little bit about this earlier about why people kind of do that. And one of the questions that I was having for this, from you and Jim as well, is it seems that you guys do not draw the same line in the sand between the arts and the sciences. Like a couple of the people, like even Ninon, who's working on her dream project, who got OSV this year, is also pretty artistically oriented. And I know from speaking to her in the past that those kinds of perspectives have informed the way she's approached what she's working on. And so I'm just curious, over your lifetime at looking at different projects and as you're learning more and more about different things, have you noticed any patterns between people borrowing over ideas from the sciences into the arts and vice versa, and how that could lead to something new? I mean, I think the person that kind of weirdly popularized this was Steve Jobs many years ago, right? And by the way, I'd also say Lucas as well, George Lucas. Like everything that was done with ILM, that was a very practical application about combining the arts and the sciences. But what I'm referring to specifically is, can we leverage some of the way that artists will think about the world and apply that into the sciences? And I actually would say the nature of what you're doing with OSV also kind of has that in spirit, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, you're not wrong. There's an older book by C.P. Snow called The Two Cultures. And I think he wrote it in the 1950s, in which he lamented the separation of the sciences and the arts, because they can inform one another with amazing results. And the specialization that was emerging at that time and has continued into our own, I think, does a disservice to innovation, to creativity, to discovery. I mean, just look at all the quantum physics guys, right? They all turned into either Taoists or Buddhists
Or musicians.
yeah, exactly. And that's the other thing. A lot of scientists that I know are huge poetry fans, for example, something that you would not naturally put together. And I've gotten some of the absolute best recommendations from like theoretical physicists for books completely outside of physics. The personality type seems, I guess this is called a polymath group, right?
Polymath Salon.
Yeah. So that is at least a correlation what I have found with some of the brightest minds in not only the sciences but also in the arts. My CTO is a great example here. He was one of our first year fellows, and his application was he wanted to be able to use artificial intelligence to visually create what an artist, in this case, a grand master pianist playing Rachmaninoff, sees as she plays the music. And I loved that idea because I love music and I love AI. And so it worked out very, very well. But then, of course, we found that his technical skills on the pure data science side were literally off the charts. As you mentioned, we have a venture arm as well. And I put him in front of some of our really hardcore data guys who we've invested in their companies. And one who I've known a long time was like, Jim, you've heard of 10x engineers? And I went, of course. And he goes, Misha is a 100x engineer. Hire him. And I did. And so the way we look at the world is, again, evidentiary. Misha doesn't have a PhD in computer science. He's 21 years old. And yet his proof of work is extraordinary. And he is right now building out our on-prem AI suite here at OSV and using architectures that I've been lucky enough to know a lot of the leading researchers in AI. And I put the architecture in front of my friend David Ha of Google Brain fame, and he now has his own startup in Tokyo. And he was like, this is kind of next level. And please keep me completely up to date on how this architecture works out. So yes, to answer it with an emphatic yes, we are big believers that the arts and sciences should commingle, co-create, have conversations and meetings like the one you just attended, because great things can come out of that. Atman, I don't know your view.
Yeah.
I can kind of give like two or three examples of like how we've seen this play out. Like one example probably is Monica Seyfried, where her background was originally as like an interaction designer. She had always had like an interest in plants, and her thought was, instead of data centers or the cloud, what if we had data forests, where what if you could actually store data in plants and actually just
Biological
forest and
internet.
like grow them. Yes, exactly. And so the project originally started off as like an art demonstration where they showed off that, oh, this is how it could be, where you store a song or a piece of text, etc., in plants actually. And it kind of started off as like an art project. But after the fellowships, right now, she's currently actually running tests where they are actually storing the data in DNA, in the seeds, and which now they are growing plants to basically go from like art to the actual science, and basically just bridging that gap to, okay, how do you make it a reality? Interestingly, one other person was actually working on documentaries on like saving endangered languages. They're working with him to kind of just take those languages and put it in plants and save them, which is just a weird and a very unique way of kind of how kind of the cross connection came up.
And you have Nicholas making art with plants as well, essentially.
Exactly, yes. So Nick is doing something wonderful on that front as well. He's actually bioengineering colorful flowers which just do not exist and basically putting it out in the world as unique art. Well, so we've seen that. I don't think that there is like quite a difference. I think someone mentioned on the chat that the same force, creative force, which is behind art is also like driving science as well. You're just applying it to different things. The
Yeah.
force itself is just the same. So internally, at least we haven't made too big of a distinction. I will say that generally we found when people apply, they are primarily fit into one of either three categories. One is either say primarily research, where they're finding new ideas, primarily focused on it, but again, they could be working on other things as well. Or you have people who are building new ideas, basically products and services that the rest of us can use right now or in the near future. And then you have the creative folks who are primarily driven on actually creating pieces of media where which you spread new ideas. But again, everyone is like a combination of all of these three. And those are like the kind of people who we've been anyways trying to fund so far. And
in
I
my
think more or less
perspective,
it's on the system level where together that is where the magic comes in, where you don't
yeah,
necessarily have to just pick one or the other. It's when combined is how you get magic.
yeah, I very wholeheartedly agree with that, and I can add to that. So the perspective I've always had on this kinds of stuff is, and we were talking about this earlier, is you have a crowd, a group of people, a collective that you're trying to, how do you control a crowd, right? So if you ask a scientist or an engineer, they're going to go and make a bunch of signs and instructions and all this kinds of stuff. You ask a musician, and they'll just play a really good song. And those are both ways of interfacing with a collective system and being able to integrate and control and have feedback within all these kinds of things. And that's why Alon, who's one of my professors, can definitely add to this, is I think it's sort of it's on a small scale, I could see why it was a necessary line to draw in the sand. But when you sort of zoom things out, it actually doesn't seem to be the case, especially with this whole biological prompt engineering thing, which we can get into another time. And the other interesting thing is that there does seem to be an interest coming from a diversity of sources around the world, right? So there's organizations like Socratica, which I believe is, maybe Harry can speak more, is primarily based in Canada. You have Donia from Augmentation Lab. Donia and Erdoza, they're both part of Augmentation Lab. In fact, multiple, Jim, of your people that got OSV. So I was a co-organizer for the summit this year. Ninon was in the community. Michelle was in the community. Yeah, good overrepresentation. But Augmentation Lab was this interesting thing based out of Cambridge that was a mix of scientists and artists and how to stitch those things, together. And this is also very much the theme with Ekkolapto, as most of you have probably seen before. And my question is, why do you think the arts has not been elevated to the same level as, say, tech and the hard sciences? Because it's like, if you go to certain people, in the moment that you say you're an artist and you're approaching things from an artistic perspective, they'll almost sort of like look at you like you've got a third eye, right? Especially if you're approaching some crazy complicated problem. And from my perspective, just what I've seen in my 20 years of living so far is that the artistic philosopher design perspective can actually speak volumes to what the output will look like, because of the way we interface with the world, right? We interface through our sensory organs and all these kinds of things. But it's also because I feel like artists, traditional artists, you could say, people that fit that stereotype, are more able to engage with paradoxical ideas. And I feel like if you've undergone a more traditional STEM kind of training, it's like, all right, you have these very specific parameters that you have to think within, because this is what's been done so far. And I feel like it doesn't necessarily give you the opportunity to branch out. I'm curious if you can speak to any patterns you've noticed with that.
I think if you look back at kind of the age of enlightenment and the scientific method emerging, all of the people who became giants, they refer to themselves as natural philosophers, meaning that they were interested in a huge variety of things. I'm sure everyone on the call knows that Isaac Newton spent vastly more time on alchemy than he did on physics. And we look back at that and think, oh, well, wasn't he weird, or isn't that weird? I don't think that's weird at all. I think that the way that breakthroughs can happen is uniting those two impulses. Dirac, I think, who came up with
Paul, yeah.
yeah, apparently that came to him in a kind of a fugue state dream, and that he woke up and drew the diagram, and I just think that one challenge is in the arts. You can't replicate. There's no way to use the scientific method, right? And say, okay, we're only going to publish bestsellers at Infinite Books. We're only going to do box office, huge success movies, because we have the formula for the best novel, the best nonfiction. It doesn't exist, right? So you've got Rick Rubin, who's probably one of the most successful of all of the producers. He doesn't play an instrument. He has no formal training in music, and so
he's got taste.
Yes, he's got taste, exactly. But the point is, they don't naturally work together. The ability to, for example, I mentioned What Works on Wall Street. I included an appendix and all of the data sources that I used, because anyone else using the same data set that I used and using the same models that I tested should get the same results. We should be able to replicate the research. When you can't replicate, there's something going on that you need to investigate further. Well, in the arts, the world doesn't work like that at all, right? And I was reading about Steve Jobs, and one of the things that really, when you look at his career, was his ability to notice exceptional information. And the book that I'm reading basically says it was his take on King Lear, of all things, that led him down the path to a lot of the things that he ended up doing at Apple. And everyone kind of, that's a head scratcher, right? And I haven't gotten to the part where the author explains why it was Lear, but it was, the part that I noticed was he wasn't reading Lear in a traditional environment. He wasn't reading it for a college literature course. He was reading it because he was interested in it. And so, set and setting, environment matters. And so if you're reading Lear, I'm a huge Shakespeare fan, and I've read all the plays and I know all of his poems and everything else. What an insightful, what a natural philosopher that guy was. And so, but the point about Lear is, if you're reading it in an academic environment, there are expectations, right? And the expectations are, will this be on the test? And people aren't reading it for the same reason that Jobs was reading it. Jobs was reading it to learn more about our nature, about human nature, and about how things and why our nature can often lead us to do things that are, like Lear, very, very destructive for what we want to achieve. But as I was reading the chapter, I was thinking, well, I don't know if any of you are fans of the HBO show Succession, but Succession is based on King Lear. And if you've read Lear and you've watched that show, you just cannot, you cannot not see that. And so the interaction between domains and domain knowledge, between the arts and sciences, is something where I think that there is a lot of fertile ground to be covered. And because our grants and fellowships are not tied to a formal organization or a very narrowly focused organization, we have the privilege of putting money with, like, the weirder the better in many circumstances with us, but we also really like practical things as well. We funded a woman who's working on privacy for cell phones. Most people
I think we know who that is.
Yeah. Most people don't know that they're being recorded all the time. And so we just had a session with her. She's ready to show her beta product to the world, and she's going to do it in a very artistic way. I'm not going to give it away, but it's bold and it is brilliant in my opinion. So we love things that are odd or that are not going to get or not obviously, but are probably not going to get funding from traditional sources.
So this is a good way to transition. So I want everybody to start raising their hand if they have questions, just because of timing and everything. But we already actually have a list of some questions from the comments. So
Sure.
Damaris here was saying, I've always wondered how you distinguish great but crazy seeming ideas from crazy non-substantial ideas. At the beginning, they seem to sound the same to most humans.
Yeah. Well, first off, that goes back to what I was saying about what I transferred from my time as a empirical algorithmic investor on Wall Street. I will search for at least some evidence that they're not just batshit crazy, because you know it's been my experience that new ideas, what does it come into the world? When a genius comes into the world, a confederacy of dunces always aligns against them. People are always talking about how they want improvement. They want like better systems. They want all these things. But one of the other underlying factors of our human nature, human OS, is we hate change. We really fight against it. We don't like it. I mean, just look at every innovation. Go all the way back to writing. And Socrates was saying, oh, that's a bad idea. We really don't want writing. I look at writing, obviously, in a very different light. And then publishing for the first time, like when Gutenberg did the press, that gave us really, for the first time, the ability to, at scale, time bind our ideas and send them forward into the future. And that created the society we're living in today, right? Prior to that, it was monks and scrolls. And the people who had access to those scrolls were the kings and their priests and everyone else. So the base from which knowledge could grow was incredibly limited and contained. And I just was reading about the same book I referred to a moment ago. And the author says, you know, when the word innovation entered the English language over 500 years ago, it was a synonym for sin, because God had made the world perfect. To introduce anything new, and he gives the example of Eve and the apple, was a sin and a heresy. And when you think about that, that dominated the Dark Ages. It dominated the idea that innovation, new, the precautionary principle for the David Deutsch fans on the call had run amok. And anything new was looked at as a heresy or, don't ever do that. And then, of course, we got to the age of reason and enlightenment, and people realized, hey, wait a minute, this new way of doing things is a heck of a lot better than the old way. But then just think about that. What did that topple? That toppled the entire medieval ecosystem. It toppled medieval philosophy. It disrupted mercantilism, feudal economics with markets. It scraped the whole royal oligarchy and led to democracies. So small thing, like put yourself back 500 years into that mindset. New is bad. Innovation is a sin. And people are going to call you crazy if you come up with, well, hang on a minute. Why don't we do some tests and see whether there might be something to this whole scientific stuff, right? And what happened? You know, nevertheless, it moves. Galileo was forced to recant. And that's when you allow for a monoculture that hates change, and I think that defines most of the Dark Ages, you get no change. And, you know, back then, it's like saying somebody's brave with their crazy idea today, well, what's the worst that could happen to them, right? They get called names or whatever. Back then, you got burned at the stake, and so like we owe a tremendous amount to these early, very brave natural philosophers.
We're on the shoulders of
Right. Well, I've heard it's probably apocryphal, but there's a story that quote from Isaac Newton, if I've seen further than others, it's because I've been able to stand on the shoulders of giants, was actually a dig against Leibniz, because Leibniz was a dwarf and those two hated each other. And so that story also makes the rounds, but he's right. It ended up being interpreted the right way. Yes, we have to stand on the achievements and findings of others. That's how you build, that's how you grow in any endeavor.
Perfect. I think we should transition into questions. Donia's got her hand up.
Hey, thanks, Addy. Thanks, Jim.
Oh, I love you're on the Enterprise there.
I am, yes.
Very, very nice. Very nice.
Thank you. I'm calling you from space, a couple of years into the future.
Perfect.
Have they
I'm
cured hair
excited.
loss yet in the
Huh?
future? Have they cured hair loss yet in the future?
Have I had hair loss?
No, have
No,
they
no, no.
cured hair loss yet in the future?
Yes. I mean, I think there are also places in Turkey nowadays that also work on that. But yes,
Stephen
genetic
Wolfram once told me that he'll know science has really made a difference when they put hair back on his head.
Well, although Captain Picard obviously, right? But I think it's a choice. It's a stylistic choice in the future. So there's also style. When I was working on BCIs, I was considering shaving my head to get better signals. But to do it. Anyway, to my question. I was curious, Jim Atman. So I feel like what we're currently observing is science, in a sense, becoming more mainstream. I think there's sort of a game theory happening where, okay, more and more people study science, and the knowledge is becoming more widespread, but that also leads to kind of a certain competition in that domain. Like the earlier polymaths that we talked about, they had kind of in a sense, like there's a downside and an upside, the privilege to be like one of the only ones working on these things and being there to explore different fields, different ideas. And there wasn't really, in a sense, competition around them. I mean, sure, there were some others that were working on things, but it wasn't to the extent that we have today, where now we've like tripled or quadrupled our population size in the last 100 years. And I feel like this competitive pressure is often kind of constraining also scientific creativity, because you're looking, well, I think a lot of young people look at essentially how much there is and still how little it seems to be that there is really a fully unexplored field. It takes a while to find these, I think Paul Graham calls them fractals. And I'm curious, what do you think? Do we technically need fewer people in science, but the ones who actually, and give those who really, really care about and are interested, like space to explore? And then, or do we need more people and just give them more opportunity and encourage them to be more, what we call like, be philosopher builders or be more transdisciplinary?
So I have a very strong view on this, and it's a who will guard the guardians point of view. I do not think that first off, how are we going to pick the panel that decides? How are we going to pick the people who pick the other people? Committees are good for some things, but they are very rarely good for innovation. Can you imagine a group of probably government selected experts that would have come up with the iPhone or back Pixar or silly things like Rubik's cubes and pet rocks? that is the brilliance of free markets, and I don't mean just economically. I mean intellectual free markets as well. I think intellectual free markets are absolutely vital, and they get you there faster. when they're open to everyone, whatever their background, whatever their credentials. I fear I'm not like the guys at the Thiel Foundation. Like I definitely believe that we need universities, and that we need people to be able to go to them. But the worry that I have is you don't. The reason that the 4-year plan under the Nazis and the 5-year plan under Stalin and his successors didn't work was because that is not how discovery happens. The trying to put top-down systems in place. The world is a complex adaptive system. And we all know where emergence comes from in complex adaptive systems. It comes from underneath, not from up here. And so I believe that the specialization that you're referring to, yeah, it can be a problem if you overly put somebody in a container and say you're only allowed to look at this particular segment of whatever the research that you're doing. For brilliant people, that's a prison cell. And so the other thing that we want to encourage with the fellowships and grants program is an escape hatch, right? Like there are a lot of people with really great ideas, but they don't fit the box, right? I think we've often, it's a legacy of Taylorism. Taylor was a guy who studied factories in the United States and said that they were woefully too much haphazard. And he basically turned all of the people on the factory floor into automatons, into robots. And they lost a great deal of experience that the people working on the floor had, right? And because they weren't even allowed to say, hey, it might work a lot better if we do it this way. That's how strident Taylor was about each person just conforming to their particular. No, your job is to turn the wrench. That's it. That's your only job. Now, it did improve efficiency in factory settings and environments. There's no argument about that. But if you go too far into either of these extremes, right? The alternate would be, hey, just everybody make it up as you go along and let's see if we can put a car together. Probably not going to turn out too well for you. Again, the unity of a systematic approach, but with a wide allowance for people to say, should we try it this way? Should we try it that way? This is kind of speaking to your, should we allow more people or fewer? I think more, right? I think that there are, the human colossus is a fascinating thing. And the synthesis of ideas from wherever you get them can be really, really a powerful thing. And again, I'm a huge fan of David Deutsch in The Beginning of Infinity. But if you read that book, like, he's a great killer line in there. He's like, speaking of, the committee that doles out money for doing research, he's like, well, if you went back to 1900 and asked people, the most educated people on the planet, what did they think about quantum physics or the internet? Well, they didn't think about it at all because they had not yet been invented. And the idea that we can anoint a privileged few to dole out the funding and the direction of STEM, especially, but of everything, I think is very dangerous and leads to very suboptimal results. So from my way of looking at the world, the more the better. And hopefully programs like ours will multiply such that anyone with a really good idea can at least get enough funding for them to explore that idea. And we're fine with negative results. Like, that's the other thing. just our very disposition leads us to not be intuitively willing to learn via negativity, right? Like one of the things that we're going to do once our architecture is stable and we have the entire on-prem AI lab up is we're going to have models that just generate null hypotheses and then publish them to a data set that any scientist or anyone working in any domain can have access to. Because back to Sherlock Holmes, I guess we started this with Sherlock Holmes. The Hounds of Baskerville, he figured out that the family must have known the intruder because the dog didn't bark. And we don't naturally think that way. And we're losing a lot of signal because of that, in my opinion.
This could be an interesting, so there, by the way, for everybody else, if you have questions, comments, whatever, just raise your hand in the chat. I think it'd be interesting to hear from Harry, Dugan from the Wolfram Institute, Morgan from Frontier Tower. But right now we actually have Professor Lon Barinholtz, who is the professor of the lab that me and another one of your grantees, Dan Van Zandt, came from actually. And I think he has some interesting things he wants to talk about.
Come from, you're still there. So yeah, first of all, just thank you for funding two of my lab members. They've now even less reason to listen to me and what to do.
I'm sure they will continue to listen to you.
In any case, I mean, my head's gonna fall off because I'm shaking, up and down so much. But a couple of points that I really wanted to jump in. So, and it's very similar to a conversation we had, Addy, with Nico, and this, and it's something one of your grantees, Dan Van Zandt, is he? I don't know if he's on the call, but he's actually explicitly researching this, and it's this space of research that it's sort of like the tragedy of the commons kind of problem, and it's that we need public funding for sort of long-term, not necessarily profitable research, certainly not in the short term that venture looks for, the kind of payoff that, and so it has to be conservative in some sense because there's a very limited number of public dollars. And what it does is it does really truly, in an organic, emergent way, very well-intentioned people. You're talking about, I've served on NSF panels, and what you're really talking about is that exactly that kind of dystopian view of here's the 10 people who decide what's going to happen in cancer research for the next decade or so, and that is preposterous on its head. On the other hand, the degree of expertise, because of this specialization that you mentioned, because science has become fragmented into, frankly, it's in a sense of the blessing of and curse of knowledge. There's just too much to know and too many techniques to master. That to have the expert in the field, it's one guy sometimes or one woman who is the person who can make an assessment of this particular research proposal. And so it really does come down to this narrow, and then it becomes a very self-reinforcing kind of world, because those people, not only, it's not so much that they're not willing to entertain some radical new idea, but they're simply not capable of entertaining it. And I've seen examples of exactly that on these panels. People, I don't understand what this person is talking about. I'm maybe the leading expert in this field, but this is somehow outside of my domain of expertise. Who's suited to review that? Nobody, frankly. There's nobody who's in a position because of the sort of the nature of the beast. And then on the flip side, you've got, of course, industry, which is much more tolerant in some ways of exploration. You can have a startup. You can, especially nowadays, anybody can, especially with AI. You can start a startup in in a day, have a quote unquote product, and even try to commercialize it, and then you can have what I think you guys are seeing already. Here's some hidden talent who's performing in some clubs, and lo and behold, this is a great talent that could never have been found by the classic music industry kind of model or something like that. But of course, the private industry, the private sector is driven by very different goals than the public sector is. Not necessarily concerned it's concerned with profit. And I know, your background, I assume you have no problem with profit and capitalism. It is by far it is the engine of certainly of contemporary growth in technology and in science. Something I worry about, because I say AI has left the universities behind. All of the progress is happening out of the private industry and out of the frontier labs. And so that's a concern, of course, because their incentive structure is very different. We're not talking about good versus evil, but we're talking about very different incentive structures. And everybody wants the long-term betterment of humanity kind of research that comes out of that has historically come out of public funding. But we want the ability, the flexibility, and the ability to, and the disruptive competency of the private sector. And just so then, I guess, I mean, sorry, this is a bit of a speech, but I'm wondering, I see you as representative of, this new model in some sense, that says, hey, we are going to be funding, you don't have to you don't have to create revenue. You sort of just have to demonstrate that you have some utility, or there's some brilliant idea here that can grow, but it doesn't fit necessarily the for-profit model, and it doesn't necessarily have 10 years of established science behind it. Here, like in the funding world, in the academic funding world, you have to have you're supposed to have you've done your three-quarters of research by the time you're even applying for the grant, right? So you're talking about, here's a brand new idea. It's awesome. It's amazing. It seems to have promise. Who is funding that, right? And so here's the real question: is there some scalable way of doing this? Is there a way when it doesn't just depend on frankly incredible people like yourself, who's like, or just want to see this kind of thing grow? But how do we scale that, right? Is it just you and maybe speaking to your colleagues, and forming a network? Is there a way to even incentivize it in such a way that is it almost like an exchange? We've talked a little bit last salon about like a crypto version of this, where people can do sort of micro investments and things like that. And I guess, to what extent are you thinking about how you could not just depend on Jim O'Shaughnessy, right? And one guy, or some others like you, we're blessed to have, but at the same time, that's not going to really get us probably to this new domain of capturing all this talent and all these ideas.
Yeah, I think your concerns are very valid. I think that we need both. I tend, yes, one of the co-hosts of Odd Lots, which is a Bloomberg podcast, I had him on my podcast, and he called me. He's like, "Are you an anarcho-capitalist, man?" And I'm like, I'm not. But I do believe in social return on investment as well. And my way of pushing these ideas forward is to do it. It's so easy to yap. It's so easy to talk and say, oh, wouldn't it be great if we did this and this and this? And, that kind of virtue signaling, you see it all over social media, you see it everywhere. And I'm a big believer in, you're not what you say you will do, you are what you do. And I think that is a signal to other people as well. So your concerns are absolutely accurate. And we have not yet come up with a systematic way to scale this type of dual funding for projects. I think, though, from the conversations that I have had with other people whose circumstances are somewhat similar to my own, that it is an idea that is catching on. It is an idea that people hadn't even kind of thought. You mean if I want to set up my own fellowship and grant program, I can just do that? And the answer is yes, you can. And so we're highly mimetic creatures, in both the Dawkins sense, but also in the meme sense that we see all over social media today. And so one of the things that I see already happening is others saying, wow, how do I do, how do I do this? we've been asked if people could piggyback on our program. I've been asked by several friends, like, can you help us if we're going to set up one of these? In fact, we are building out an AI set of workflows for people who are interested in doing the types of grants that we are giving. And, we're going to turn a nice little business out of it. So your concern is absolutely valid. I don't think we're there yet in determining how we're going to dual track this. Your comment about specialization is noted, and of course I agree with you. Certain domains, the knowledge required is so intense that literally, you've got to spend 20 years to achieve that kind of thing. But, I think Max Planck, with his remark, science advances one funeral at a time, should also be considered here. Because when you get that kind of domain knowledge, you tend to be pretty protective about it. And even if you're not actively thinking, let's not have these other ideas come and challenge my idea, I think historically, that's what we've seen, right? And oftentimes for reasons that have nothing to do with the domain or the science in question. David Bohm comes to mind. And he was a student of Oppenheimer's, and he came up with a thesis called Hidden Variables. I'm sure many of you on the call are familiar with David and his work. But for completely political reasons, Oppenheimer was told to suppress Bohm. It was during the madness of the McCarthy era, and he had at one time attended a communist meeting. So just insanity. But Oppenheimer was told by the powers that be, suppress him. And there's actually written evidence of a telegram Oppenheimer sent to his other colleagues saying, if we cannot disprove Bohm's thesis, we must ignore it. So I don't know how many people on the call have seen the movie Mean Girls, but that's kind of what it reminds me of. We have all sorts of exogenous things affecting the work that we are doing. And David Bohm was a brilliant scientist. And the idea that his work would be suppressed by equally brilliant colleagues of his is just ridiculous to me. So I wish I had a cleaner answer for you, but the answer that I have,
thinking about it. That's
great news. Because I think you're right. I think we need to dual track. I think that in many ways you're right also about the tragedy of the commons. And it doesn't mean that we just throw up our hands and say, oh, well. It means that we try a bunch of different ways to correct that problem. Because you're also right. Some of the basic science work that needs to get done isn't going to be profitable, maybe ever. But it still needs to get done. And like you'll see in our grants and fellowships, Atman can speak to this better than me, but we funded a lot of things that we knew that were never ever going to be profitable in a capitalistic or free market sense.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Unless Atman has any thoughts, we can move over to Malcolm. Go for it, Malcolm.
Hey, everybody. Hey, Mr. Shaughnessy. I just wanted to ask.
Jim, please.
My bad. Jim. I just wanted to ask, what do you think of rappers being the leaders of institutes and also rap as a tool for data compression for complex topics?
Have you been doing research on me? Because I love that idea. I think rap is an incredibly interesting art form because of what you mentioned. Its ability to compress ideas and make them enjoyable at the same time is kind of unparalleled in terms of at least music that is commonly popular. I also think that, like, I think of Nas and Damian Marley, and if it was 150 years ago, they'd be famous poets like Walt Whitman,
Yeah.
and then I kind of think of Pink Floyd, and if you like listen to the lyrics of their songs, they'd all be professors at Oxford or Cambridge. Um, but they found because the evolution of the art forms allowed, they found even broader audiences in their music. So I am a huge fan of that idea. And there's that great documentary on Dr. Dre with the headphones and
Oh,
Jimmy.
the Defiant one?
Yeah, the Defiant ones.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen that, I highly recommend it
Okay.
because it speaks to what you're talking about. It took those guys with their skill sets to do what they did and come up with beats and come up with the relationship with Apple and the whole thing. So count me as a huge fan of your thesis.
Cool. Yeah, it's really not mine. It's stuff I heard from Lupe Fiasco. So yeah, I just thought I'd ask. He
Very cool.
has been doing a lot of rap science academic stuff, teaching at MIT.
I would love to see that.
Oh, Lupe.
Yeah.
Jim, you should have Lupe on your show.
Yeah.
Okay, you set it up. You set it
He's
up, and
incredible.
I'll have him on.
Incredibly talented. All right, cool. Malcolm, do you have any other questions, or that's good?
Well, also like the thing about rappers being leaders of institutes that came from Lupe too. Just wondering your thoughts on that. I don't really know what he meant by that.
I look, I am all in favor of as much experimentation as possible because I just had on my podcast Ken Stanley, who wrote the brilliant book Greatness Can't Be Planned. And basically, one of the things that we find not only applicable in business but everywhere is if you're looking for what to bet on, if you're going to be backing a researcher or a business, whatever, is agility. The ability to, and I mean, come on, are you kidding me? Rap battles? Are we not talking about some of the most agile minds out there that are able to, in the couple of seconds that they have, while the other person is going against them, to come up with just things that are sick and kill? So yeah, I'd be all in favor of giving it a try.
Perfect. Real quick, Tatiana.
Hi. I'm wondering if there are any other people doing what you do, because I honestly haven't heard of it, and I think it should be just like way more common.
I agree with you on your insight that it should be way more common. Tyler Cowen does a lot of grants at Emergent Ventures. Atman, you're probably going to be better here for knowing the other people.
Yeah, there are like plenty of new ones, especially that have cropped up, which basically follow the same model. Some of these are a lot more focused on certain areas, like they might be focused on, say, biology, or some might be more focused on actually building or backing early entrepreneurs. Few ones kind of fully similar, but as Jim mentioned, Emergent Ventures is one. What I'll do is I'll actually share a link to a grants sheet, which has like a whole list of grants which you can kind of take a look at. So I'll just share that here.
Perfect. All right, and then the next question we had was from Michael.
What are your thoughts on no-go theorems which rely on potentially unfounded assumptions directing scientific research away from various avenues?
That is a really challenging question because dual use, right? of so many things that could lead to incredible breakthroughs, right? Positive breakthroughs, can also be used for ill. And I wish I had a pat answer. I don't. I think that life is inherently dangerous, and the more we understand and learn about how things work, I think the further we go. But that also needs to be carefully thought about when funding things that could potentially have serious and maybe even catastrophic effects. And yeah, I mean, like that is a much, like, we could spend an entire salon just talking about that issue, because it gets back. Go ahead.
I know. I think you might have misunderstood my question, but you should continue talking.
No, if I've misunderstood, please.
Okay, so there in various fields, there are often no-go theorems which are created, which rely on various assumptions, and so some of them might be potentially unfounded and untrue. And because of those no-go theorems, people are less likely to pursue research like in those directions. Not necessarily dangerous research, just like they think it means it won't be like fruitful, even though it might actually be if those no-go theorems are not.
Okay. Okay. I that's a much easier one for me to answer. I think that, you know, in logic, you have the idea of the planted axiom, right? When you're building a logical system, you have to build it on axioms. And there's a wonderful piece in Gödel Bach where he's talking about what the tortoise said to Achilles, which is Lewis Carroll wrote this small thing. If you haven't read it, I recommend it highly, because it leads to Agrippa's trilemma about logical systems. The brief view of it is, at least Carroll's view, or I guess I should say Dodson, because he was thinking as a logician, not as a children's author, is they're having this conversation between the tortoise and Achilles, and the tortoise keeps asking Achilles, well, why does A imply B imply C? And then Achilles is like, well, because the axiom of A, and he gives axiomatic reasons, right, to the tortoise, until it becomes very, very clear that the axiom at the bottom of this elaborate system was just an assertion. There's no like literal proof that that assertion was correct. And so I think using that metaphor applied here is, you know, if I were your age and interested in something where there was a lot of no-go theorems, and like that's where those are fertile hunting grounds, in my opinion. That's where I would be looking, because a lot of those theorems and assumptions are probably wrong. And wow, I mean, what's the best place to fish where nobody else is fishing?
Yeah.
So, you know, if you have a proposal for a grant or a fellowship that relates to that, please submit it. We will definitely take it seriously.
I do have one regarding the topological censorship theorem.
Very cool. Apply.
Yeah. Michael's is actually a PhD student at Alon Barinholtz and Wilhan's lab, the same one that me and Dan came from. So he's working on some very cool stuff. Harry, go for it.
Actually, I was gonna forego my question to see Addy freestyle.
Not yet, not yet. We need some theatricality for that. Not yet, not yet, not yet. I need to get my chain. I need to get my jack. Not ready for that one yet. One day.
I admire his willingness to yield the floor to you, though, Addy.
I've been known to do some freestyles here and there, and maybe at the end we'll do it
Okay,
if
the
there's
chat really wants it, Addy.
I know,
Yeah, I can
I
see
know,
that.
I see it. All right,
Leave
maybe
early,
at the
don't
end.
leave early.
Okay, but
Maybe
okay, I'll ask a question then.
Go for it.
You know, this Medici, the modern Medici keeps on coming up as this revolving topic. Jim and your team, obviously, you're doing a lot of this work. Lately, it seems like more and more family offices or people who are in a position don't want to go and fund another academic grant or something similar. They much rather do something similar to O'Shaughnessy Ventures or write grants to these independent researchers. Can I connect, either Atman or you or somebody from your team as some of these family offices are trying to navigate and maybe take lessons learned from each of you?
Absolutely. I mean, that the question earlier was, how do you get this at scale? So if you have family offices that are asking these questions, absolutely connect them with Atman, and we will be happy to talk to them.
Okay, great. Yeah, by the way, Elon, I really resonate with what you were saying as an ex-venture person, as an ex-venture partner. I tried funding deep tech, but venture model can only allow for this narrow sliver of funding that is exponential in its nature, but that takes away from all this public good that breakthrough research can do. And so I'm sort of at this awkward juncture. So totally resonate with, yeah, Elon, what you were saying, Jim and Atman. So, but yes, I will follow up. Atman,
Yeah,
I'll steal
and
something.
and on that issue, one of the things that's nice about having a family office without LPs is that there's a lot of arbitrage space in venture, and we are looking mostly at pre-seed and seed investing, but we're also looking at developing SaaS type. That's the easiest analogy. It's not SaaS, but it involves AI workflows that venture won't touch because it can't return the fund. There are so many kind of cash cows sitting out there that nobody is funding because they don't meet the very narrow criteria that you brought up of venture. And we're not only building internally to test this market out, but we are looking at funding a portfolio of these types of companies. Because wow, that adherence to their need for the power law and most of the VC guys that I know are always, I always look, and if this company can't return the fund, I'm going to have to pass on it, which I think is bullshit and just a silly way to think. But hey, that's just more opportunities for me.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Perfect. Dugan.
Hi, Jim. Thanks for doing this. This is a delightful conversation.
Thanks, David.
I wanted to know, what is your valence to artistic pursuits, specifically visual arts? Are you looking for human expression, or how it's perceived by the audience, or it's aesthetics, problem solving or computation? What are your thoughts about marketability, profitability, or industrial commercial application?
So I'll cop out and say, like, all of the above. I don't think. Look, I think we need a second renaissance. I think that humanism is a pretty good credo, and by that I mean the philosophy of humanism. That we, as human beings, have a lot to offer, and indeed are the agents that can make the world a vastly better place. So if you look at our background, we will fund things that we expect will have no real profitability and or market for that particular type of thing. We could be wrong, by the way, but the art as an expression of one's humanity or ideas, like, yeah, of course. I don't think that Michelangelo was thinking how much, I know he had a patron, but I don't think he was thinking about what his other sculptures would sell for when he was doing David. And so now I think that art can also help educate. And if it's going to help educate, it's probably going to be easier if it's also entertaining. Right. So when I put my hat on through our Infinite Books publisher or Infinite Films, like we want, for example, we're making a documentary about Bell Labs. From the source material we're using is the book The Idea Factory. And the director is one of our fellows. And Jason Carmen is his name. And we were just talking about it, and it's going to be entertaining as hell. It's going to be like, I love his ideas about bringing it to life, right? And so there's an example of, we might also be able to make some money on that movie by selling it to one of these streamers. Was that why we're making the movie? Not primarily, but that's an example of one where we also think there's a business return that we're going to be able to get from that particular documentary. And so I think that depending on the use case that we're talking about, we are very open to funding things that, like, that ain't ever going to make any money, all the way through, wow, that could do really, really well in the marketplace as well. So we don't have a litmus test, I guess, would be just kind of the honest answer to that.
That's interesting. Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Perfect. And also Dugan is from the Wolfram Institute, which has some pretty cool stuff that they're working on. And one of your grantees, Dan Van Zant, is also working with them on some of that as well. Next, we have Urtaza from Augmentation Lab.
Thank you, Addy, for hosting this. And again, thank you, Jim and Atman, for giving us really great insights. I'm deeply inspired. Jim, since I know the time is also constrained, I would want to tinker upon something that I usually ask very successful people, like, what is that one point of failure when running these programs like these has taught you in, like, investing in people like these. So I'm pretty much interested in learning, like, what are some failures that you would highlight, and that could be, like, a learning lesson for us all over here, and how we can, like, learn from that and perhaps, like, utilize it in our day-to-day lives. If you would like to share something like that. Yeah.
So if I understand the question, what is a single point of failure in potential fellows or grantees that would give us a reason to pass on them? Is that what you're asking?
No, I was asking from your personal experience, like, while organizing these fellowships, and, like, any point of failure that you guys reached as a organization, and, like, that you guys learned from and reshaped your model itself, and that you would want to share with us.
Oh, I see. So, like, failure is a ladder as far as I'm concerned. And novel mistakes are portals to discovery. So we've made a lot of mistakes. And we I guess what we learned is certain things to look for in the people that we are giving the grants to, that when we did our first round we weren't really mindful of. One of those is a non-collaborative nature, and holding their ideas as uniquely theirs and theirs alone. And being very, very precious about it, we have found doesn't really lead to advancing the world the way we would like with our funding. And so that's something that when we started this process, I wasn't thinking like that. And then I saw some examples of people we actually did fund. And so that's been added to our toolkit. We test for that. Another thing that we've learned is that the ability for the potential fellow or grantee to articulate directionally is great, but if it becomes way too specific, we worry that should that very specific narrow path that they want the funding for fail, are they just going to go, okay, well, that didn't work? And I mentioned earlier, agility, the ability to pivot, really important, not just in business, but in life. And so we will, through our questioning, get to a view on whether they are going to be a little too brittle in their quest. And then I guess the final one would be I don't usually like dichotomies very much because this either or is very deterministic in the way it looks at the world. But there is a useful rule of thumb, heuristic that I use. And that is the person pre or post fall? And by that I mean, when I was younger and I was pre-fall, I was pretty arrogant. And I thought that my ideas were the best ideas. And then the world punched me repeatedly in the face. And I fell, but I got back up. And so I became, in the post-fall, far more humble about, my own ideas, my own place in the world. I started looking at myself at best as a co-creator as opposed to the creator. And it got me a lot further in my career and in my endeavors than I would have gotten pre-fall. So there are ways for testing whether somebody is pre-fall or post-fall. And, spoiler alert, we're looking for mostly people who are post-fall because a lot of the people that we're funding, they started taking stuff apart at age 7. and so they began, their curiosity took over, and they started, like setting fires and doing all that kind of stuff that led to a very early encounter that made them post-fall. That is another great indicator, by the way. When did they start all of their tinkering and all of their investigation and all of that? And for the most part, it's pretty young. And now I'm not saying by the way, this is our fellows and our grantees tend to be young, right? Because you have your neurons are firing faster than mine. But if we got a grant or a fellowship proposal from somebody who was like 75 years old and we thought it was great, we'd fund them. So we're not discriminating on age, but the facts are the facts. Most of the people who are wanting to do this stuff are younger people. And the oddity there, again, back to the mismatch that we see, like that's the best time to try and take that year off if you get a fellowship. And yet many of our institutions won't extend the funding to somebody who's young because, well, you haven't learned enough yet. You haven't done enough yet. And so those would be the easy ones to say what we didn't know then and know now.
Yeah, I can add like a slightly bit more. I think one of the things is probably like, and this is like a failure mode which you can't control for. It's just outside of your control. Family matters where things don't go as planned with the recipients. In those cases, we've seen people do get sidetracked. And again, it does happen, and just not getting back on track later on as well, not being able to recover. That can be one of the failure modes. But again, this is not something you can plan for, or the best you can do is we still support them through it. That point. Outside of that, one thing at least personally that I found is my intuition has now grown far more sharper. So we do look back at all the outcomes of all the fellows and the grantees over the past couple of years and how things have panned out. And based on that, at least personally, I've found that okay, the intuition is now sharper. That okay, in some cases where we had concerns and like things worked out a certain way, in some cases we knew that okay, this could happen, and it worked out another way. So in that sense, that is just a part of going through that process where you can only learn over time once you've seen like, okay, everyone, you're talking to like 500,000 people every year. And then from there, you're getting to a certain number. And then you see the outcomes play out over the years. I think that's one thing you just individually, you just need to pick up when you go through it. But we have found, I would say at least two things where we can almost reliably say that, yes, these are commonalities. These are probably necessary, but not necessarily sufficient. One is we found a obsession and being prolific. These two things are by default, which we found that okay, if they exhibit these two, they have a very, very good chance of success. And this is true of the ones who've just outperformed the most overall that we found, just in terms of on the positive side.
Yeah, the obsession one is good. Thank you for bringing that one up, Atman. There is a very high correlation. I don't know that it's causation. I think it is. But there is a very high correlation with things that we fund, people we fund that end up doing quite well. Most of them are absolutely obsessed with the topic that we are funding.
Perfect. 1 second.
Just I'm getting the old hook here
Okay.
from
Okay. we got one last question. We'll do Tigran and Tatiana super quickly. Tigran, go for it.
Yeah. Hey, thank you for the session. The question is, what do you generally think about network states, and more specifically, how to fund them? Because it seems like they were trying to solve like the original problem of politics, of like coordinating a lot of people and making sense out of this, but the lens is different. It's more of like a community first approach that's trying to reinvent like states from the scratch, right, from bottom up. Context is I worked on one for like a year now, and it's on pause now, and I'm also involved with a couple more of them, and I'm kind of postful when it comes to this specific topic, basically.
So, I mean, my initial response would be, you should tell me what you think about network states because you've been working in it. Broadly, I'm in favor of all sorts of experimentation. And the network states are very intriguing to me. But we haven't, I mean, my answer might actually be, you should apply for a fellowship with the way that, since you've been involved in it, you probably have a much clearer idea what works and what doesn't work than I'm going to have. So rather than give you some off the cuff, oh, well, I think this, you know more about it than I do. So I would recommend you use what you've learned. We were just talking about mistakes and failures being both ladders and portals of opportunity. I think what I can answer is I am very intrigued by the concept. And I am also somewhat skeptical about the solutions that I've seen thus far. That does not mean that there isn't going to be a solution at some point. And that's why I'm again inviting you to apply for a fellowship, because that is something I'm very intrigued in. But frankly, I don't know enough about it to give you a reasonable answer. I could only give you my impressions. That's the other thing, by the way. I love people who say, I don't know. Because, because that's another test of honesty, right? And it's just, as a culture, at least in the West, this desire for certainty. I mean, we fall for it every single time. Who are you going to follow? I would too, by the way. Who am I going to follow up that hill in a war situation? I'm going to follow the guy who says to me, we're going to take this hill, Jim. We're not going to lose any of our fellow soldiers. I want him to be as certain as possible. I don't want the guy who's going to give me the real odds, right? Because the real odds are probabilistic, and it would take him 10 minutes or her 10 minutes to explain that the probabilities on taking this hill without casualties are really quite low.
Those saying, never tell me the odds.
But yeah, so I'll end that with apply, and you will definitely get my eyes on it.
We'll apply.
All right, Tatiana, super quick.
I view what you're doing here as like a creative innovation in finance. What is that correlate to like a for-profit business, like some of the companies that you fund? Like, what is that post model?
So I think that the cleanest example would be the idea of smart swarms. Are you familiar with? Okay. So one of the things that our technology and our interconnectedness allow, especially with the application of heavy doses of artificial intelligence, is for spontaneous coordination efforts. And the material that I would recommend on smart swarms, Atman, remind me to let you put it somewhere where people can update it. But for the first time, really ever, what we're seeing is that you can coordinate large groups of people in a way that was simply impossible like 15 years ago. And we've been experimenting with it in both filmmaking and in other endeavors on our venture side. But the challenge of it is it's kind of all smart swarms tend to be one-offs, right? Here's our problem. This is what we need to solve. All of the people come in from different domains who are interested in that particular problem. They work on it, and kind of the good side of crowds. There's Laban on the bad side of crowds, and then there is Sirawiki on the good side of crowds. The smart swarm is the good side of crowds, the diversity of opinion, the coming at it from a different domain, discipline, etc. So that these kind of coordination problems are showing some promise, but I don't actually have the time to give you the full rundown on where we're seeing it at the venture level. But great question. That's what I love about audiences filled with really smart people. Like, they really stump you on the questions.
Wonderful. All right, I think you have to go in a bit. So if there was a one provocative question or thought that you could leave us all with as you vacate from here, what would it be?
Well, I don't know that it's provocative, but life is for the living. Motion, life is a verb, not a noun. And the more you understand that, the more you're going to actually do. Prioritize and stack rank action above statements. It's really easy to talk. It's really easy. And also find things to root for as opposed to against.
I like
It's
that.
really, really, really easy to find a bunch of things to root against. It's far, far more enjoyable and better for society as a whole to find things to root for.
Perfect. Couldn't have said it better. Thank you so much, Jim. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. And thanks for giving me all of your time, everyone on the call. I
course.
really appreciate it.
Anytime.
right.
Thank you.
Gotta go.
Thank you. Take care,
Bye.
guys. Bye.
All right. Okay. That is it for today.
Well,
Thank
Addy,
you,
aren't you
Addy.
gonna rap?
Well,
yeah.
now that Jim
Yeah.
is left, now all the pressure is
Spit some
off.
bars.